I'm Sir Flowbojan Thunderhammer.
And I'm Teflon Frosthammer.
And I'm Cabbage Tidehammer.
And this
is
WAK.
If Amtgard knighthood means anything, you can't knife a motherfucker and keep it.
And the thing that people need to understand essentially about arts and sciences events is that your scores don't matter.
Do you want a black phoenix or a white phoenix?
Jeez, language, man. We're on a
Right.
freaking podcast, for fuck's sake.
Mind-blowing experience, right?
Hello, everyone, and welcome to WAK, where we discuss topics important to the Amtgard community at large and talk with interesting people from around the film fighting world. Lucas, why don't you describe what's going on? Yeah, the last episode that we were on, we talked about some format changes that were going to be happening, and Cabbage had a really interesting direction that Jeff and I hadn't thought about, but we feel is super, super important to touch on.
Yeah, so we've done 43 episodes, and we have never actually tackled the question of, hey, what the hell even is Amtgard?
no matter how hard you tried earlier on.
Yeah. Well, I mean, so we've had a lot of people who are friends of ours who don't actually play Amtgard, but they've listened to the podcast, and they're like, hey, this is really interesting. What are you guys talking about?
Yeah, this was definitely started as a silly, fun time outreach for our kingdom and for other kingdoms to listen to and to find useful and to get to know some of the big names in the game and some of the people that we feel like deserve to be better known. It didn't occur to us that it may also be a recruitment tool.
Well, we've had a lot of people say, like, oh, I got back into Amtgard because of it.
Yeah.
Or, like, hey, I sent this to a friend and they've come out 3 times now. Like, we've had some pretty good feedback. And, yeah, like you said, we never thought of it as a recruitment tool. But this is our next, I guess, mini arc. Like, we did the belt months, and that took 4 months. Hopefully, this won't take 4 months, I don't think. Maybe a couple of episodes. This is new for us as well. I actually have written an outline with talking points.
Oh, wow, yeah.
We can't have that.
Well, this is for, kind of new player-centric, but also it needs to be somewhat structured. So we actually have that this time. But in the start of my outline, I have in this episode series, because I still haven't paced it out yet. This will kind of dictate the pacing, and then we can figure out what to do from there.
Yeah, so I know that all of us have touched on how we got into Amtgard, but why don't we take a moment to talk about, like, LARP in general? As if you were giving a sales pitch to someone who was brand new, didn't know anything about it, and you wanted them to come out next week. How would you describe Amtgard? And I'll even include Bell and Dag and any of the other Boffer-style games in this, right?
It depends on who comes up, like what their personality is and things too. Like if they're...
My name's Josh and I lift a lot, bro.
I'm going to sell it as a medieval combat sport rather than a LARP necessarily, because there's unfortunately negative connotations that are still associated to it some.
But that's a good first point. Go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, to be really broad, lots of things are a LARP. To answer the initial question, what is a LARP? Fucking wrestling is a LARP.
Oh, yeah, I mean sure.
But yeah, like Teflon says, there's some negative connotations with that.
With wrestling? Nah.
No, well, yes, actually. See also South Park, but like just with LARP in general.
Yeah, agreed. And I do the same thing. Being able to read the person that's walking up, I think, is maybe one of the key things. And I, in the past, have seen this delegated to specific people at your park rather than a position, because you have some people that are just better. You guys remember Chunk? Mm-hmm. Chunk was wonderful. Chunk could talk to anybody. He was our person that went up and talked to new people because he could read people. And you're not lying to them, right?
No.
You're emphasizing the points that
seem like it's going to be more important to that person than other things.
Well, I mean, this is again, it's marketing 101, right? You've got to find the thing that they need most.
That's right,
and
give
put
it
it
to
front
them.
and center.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, very, very broad definition for Amtgard or Dagahir or Belagarth is this is a community that comes out. We fight. It's not scripted. You are able to pick up different kinds of weapon combinations, some of which would be very historical, like sword and board, and some of which are not historical at all, like some of the weapons that Beefy has been making recently.
Yeah, absolutely. What was I going to say? Oh, so I want to get to, because we're actually touching on some stuff that I have in the talking points here, and we can cover the outline if we want to. But like these are topics I want to dig into a bit more. Do you want me to just start by going over the outline, kind of what we're going to cover?
Yeah.
Okay,
Read from
so-
a PowerPoint. I think that's what people want to hear.
Yeah, well, it's not a PowerPoint. It's a very bulleted list with multiple different levels.
Is this going to be linked?
So
in the
it
show
just doesn't have
notes?
slides, but it's a PowerPoint. Yeah.
Is this going to be linked in the show notes? It will not be linked in the show notes, I don't think. Once we have this outline fully fleshed out, I will publish it somewhere.
Maybe the last episode, basically.
Yeah, and then also once we have all of these episodes, I can put them on their own category on YouTube and put this outline on every one and say, we're covering this part of the outline in this episode, and that can be the show notes. But for the meantime, I think as we're going to kind of build this plane as we fly it, if that makes sense.
Sure.
So yeah, we're gonna do that. So let me cover the outline really quick. And the reason I'm doing this is because, and I have this in my little quote up here, we are bound to get some things wrong.
Oh yeah.
And so this is one where audience participation is highly, highly welcomed. If you have notes, drop them on Facebook, drop them on YouTube. We do read that stuff. And I also have a bit here where we say audience corrections will be addressed at the top of each episode. So if we do get something wrong, or if there's a different opinion, we will make sure to cover that at the start of each next episode. So in this episode series, we'll be answering the question, what even is that game you're always talking about? We're aiming to be as detailed as we can, but we're bound to miss a few things along the way. We're going to post documentation where we can, and we're going to try to point to other useful resources when we don't have all of the answers. And some of these things, even in this first bit that I've got here, are so exhaustive that I'm going to tell people, hey, go read this on your own because it's buck wild.
Yeah.
So just...
Early Amtgard is...
The Wild Wild West.
Early
Yeah.
Amtgard,
Of
like
Amtgard.
the guy who made it, just starting there and then moving off. Like,
Yeah,
it's,
right.
It's crazy. So part one, and I'm not going to get on all of the sub bits just yet, but what even is Amtgard? And that includes like the meaning of the name, how it started, all that. How does it work? And we're going to talk about the social structures and the combat, of course. We're going to do the who, what's, when, where's, and why. So when is it, where is it, how people can find a park, and all of that. What the various positions are, who takes up leadership positions, how you can help, why you might play. And then we're also going to talk about what else is out there. And so we're hoping to have some folks that are more familiar with those other games like Belagarth or Dagger here to come on and tell us, what it is their game is about, how it differs from what we normally do. Actually, I don't know if you saw this, Teflon, because I know you were on the way when you sent the message through, but we actually, the Darkon Wargaming group, like the official group, followed us.
I did see that. Yeah.
So we might be able to get somebody from Darkon on as well to talk about what they do.
That would be really cool.
Hey,
Because
Darkon, if you're listening to this, post on the WAK Facebook page, which will be linked in...
Just shoot us a message. That's probably,
Yeah.
Yeah.
That way, you're not super committed to anything. But because like that, I watched the Darkon documentary and it was kind of cool. Like their giant map system. Anyway, we also have a newbie corner, which is kind of the last thing we're gonna do. This is, how long should I go before I buy gear? What should I commit to? What's the first weapon I should? The questions that everybody has when they start out, right? Mm-hmm. So that's a broad overview of the outline. We will add things as we, we'll try to nest them in, but I've kind of picked the broadest categories that I can to narrow down on. So do we want to start with just point number one?
Sure.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, so what even is Amtgard? Talk about that for a second. Like, explain to me in your own words what you think Amtgard is. And how, and again, like Flo said, how would you explain this to a newbie that walked up for the first time?
Sure. So,
Ooh, better example. Sell Amtgard to your younger self. Like when you were first starting out, knowing what it is now.
you're not going to have anything else, Gary. So, no, seriously. The way that I have often pitched Amtgard to people, and this isn't, being able to read someone is important. I was definitely sold more towards this is like a fighty game aspect of it. I role played at the time, I still role play today, but looking at my 18-year-old self, that was what the person who sold me on the game thought would work better. So know that there's not only one approach. The points that, rather than going through my actual spiel, I want to cover the points that I go over because those are the same no matter what.
Yep.
The points are this. We are a live-action combat game. If you've ever seen any of the videos online of people in the full armor that are going at each other, sometimes in a boxing ring and sometimes not, it's a little like that, except instead of padding ourselves with full armor, we pad our weapons.
It's cheaper.
Because we have work on Mondays.
Yeah, it's an inverse SCA.
Yeah, that's right. No offense to anyone that plays SCA, Zeb. But he just gets hurt every week.
He's like, look at this bruise on my shoulder.
Yeah,
it's
right.
blue. And I'm like, that's bad.
It's shaped like the state of Missouri.
I don't know if you want to go with the gets hurt every week angle there, Flo.
How's your ankles doing?
Oh, they're doing great. Thanks. But yeah, I will cover that this is a live action combat, that its basis is medieval. So you'll see people using swords and shields and pole arms and things like that. We have bows, we have throwing weapons.
Any weapon you can think of, just about, we can make legal to some degree. There's some things like shield bows because our rulebook writers are cowards that they won't let us have. But
thank you, rulebook writers. And pole flails were removed. Anyways,
words.
Kind of a good thing.
Yeah, so I cover what it is, which for me is just the basic breakdown of we are a combat-centric game. I cover... I move directly from there into the wider branch. So I've talked about the combat, but combat's not all that we do. I personally learned how to cook from our game. I learned how to sew from our game. I learned how to do, as odd as it sounds, like basic repairs to my home from our game, because I picked up basic woodworking skills and things like that along the way. There is an entire arts and crafts system built in. There are people that sew, do leatherworking, weaving, woodworking, anything that you can think of that would have been a craft back then. We can probably find someone to help you if that's a direction that you want to go. And there's even different, levels of investment monetarily that you can do into the ANS. Amtgard itself has no cost to play at all. You can play Amtgard every single week for free, forever.
Yep.
You can go we have loaner weapons at our park, and so you don't even... I sell the fact that they don't need anything to get started. You don't need weapons. You don't need any money to play. Mm-hmm. You just need to show up, bring your friends and family, have a good time. We are a family-friendly environment. Yeah. So just to kind of recap everything there, go into the combat stuff, pivot from that into the fact that there's arts and science in the game as well, and when you're talking to someone about this, do not talk their ear off. Practice what you're going to say ahead of time, and do not be verbose
this
in the description.
This is why we don't let Flo talk to our newbies when they wander up.
Yeah, right. Do not be verbose in your descriptions, because they don't know what this is. You're selling them on the first idea, and if you spend 35 minutes on one topic, whether they like that topic or not, you'll lose them.
Yep.
So you'll notice that what I've been saying is relatively brief, just with the clarifications and stuff that we've given,
right?
And silly talk. But yeah, fighting, ANS, the structure. I go into the structure of how it works.
Silly talk.
Yeah,
it's the Ministry of Silly Talks.
Yeah. I go into the structure of how it works because that's something that can really pull people in. Yeah. Which is, the park that you're looking at right now. Mystic Glade is a barony. I said it right. Uh-huh. Is a barony. This is set up just like a medieval system would be, where you have shires and baronies and duchies, and we're a part of a kingdom which covers a large geographic area, and there's kingdoms all over the United States and in other parts of the world, the Canada and things like that. So that's a point of interest that people will like. And then I go into the battle games. We also have a battle gaming system here. The easiest way that I describe it, whether someone looks like they're, Johnny, I'm going to eat sticks for the rest of my life, or someone that looks like they fell straight out of a D&D cosplay, I sell it to them the exact same way.
Well, so you just touched on something there. I want to divert for a second.
Go ahead.
So a lot of our guests, if you've listened to the previous 43 episodes and you're still wondering what Amtgard is, you'll hear most of them have gotten in through some kind of D&D background, and people make a lot of comparisons of our game to Dungeons and Dragons. What do you say about that? Because my personal opinion is that it's nothing like D&D. Because D&D has that 6 seconds per round of combat, and it's very slow paced, and you have time to think. What would you compare this game to? Like point blank, because that's the thing. Is it like League of Legends? And
WoW Battlegrounds.
Okay.
That's my kind of go-to answer, at least now with the current system. At V6, 5 and 6, it was a little closer to a D&D analogy, I guess, because the pacing of the game was slower, or at least it felt slower to me. So
Was that owing to having a fixed count of lives, so people spending their actions more carefully?
To some degree, it's the live count. It was also the
abilities that people had were way different.
Yeah. You got taken out of the game longer. So much like in D&D, if you go down or are petrified or something like that in D&D, then there's some longer term-esque situations that you have to go through. Whereas now that's not the case. You're out for 30 to 60 seconds. That's it. So
back then, I mean, if you got entangled, then you were out for a 300 count.
Yeah, Entangled of yesteryear is the same as Ice Ball now.
Yes.
So they homogenized the system, and then it used to be 5 minutes. Life counts were 5 minutes. All of the stationary stuff was 5 minutes or 300 count, whatever it is.
Yeah.
And things like that. So that pacing is what made it closer. And on top of the life count system, with the life count system, it made you not want to engage every engagement. It made you want to pick a favorable engagement to go to, because if you lost a life, it's actually detrimental to your team.
There was a lot more retreating and a lot more like positioning.
The tug of war was more interesting in some ways.
Yeah. That said, I like the changes that they've made to the rulebook. I like it being more involved and fast-paced. It's easier for new people to get in because you're not sitting... Like, here's the downside to the system that Jeff just now described. If you're a new person and you're on one of these classes that have 3 lives, you're out of the entire game that's going to last 45 minutes.
First 10 minutes.
Yeah, first 10 minutes. So it's... and you had the ability to steal people's lives back then much easier than you do now as well. There were classes that could just...
You can't do it anymore.
Huh?
It doesn't exist like it used to.
Yeah, you could just take someone's life. So even if you were a class that had 5 lives... I could kill you once and, with the right combination of people on the field, immediately shatter you out of the battle game.
That's fun.
And
that's
then you were
fair
done.
and balanced and good.
So, long way to say, back on topic to the question, which is how would you compare it? I still, to this day, use, when I'm trying to sell this to someone who knows absolutely nothing about it, will still use D&D as a comparative tool. But I use it because we have a class system in our game, and the names that our classes share with D&D makes sense. The gameplay isn't the same, but again, we're not going into detailed gameplay in this. When you're talking to someone new, you are not telling them about your favorite battle game. Please don't be one of those people that say, this is my favorite let me tell you about my favorite D&D campaign to any of these people.
Lauren.
They don't... Vidalia's in the room here with us playing on her phone.
Doing important Kingdom Prime Minister business.
They wouldn't let me have a microphone. It's the patriarchy.
What? I'm sorry. That's going to be edited out, hon. I gotta go.
But you're touching on the surface level. So I've covered all of the other things. I've now moved on to, we're talking about the battle game system. And I will say, the closest thing I can compare it to would be sort of a live action Dungeons and Dragons. In that everyone has
World of Warcraft.
Yeah.
You just said World of Warcraft in a very roundabout way.
I've actually used MMOs as an example. I've said World of Warcraft before because I tell them, we have classes. Those classes, you'll recognize the names. It's Warrior and Barbarian and Wizard, and they have very specific abilities. None of this is done in a theater of the mind, and I think that that's a really important thing to cover, especially if you have someone who is used to roleplay. So when I cast a spell at you, it is that spell has a set range, or when I'm charging up a Nerf ball and hitting you with that Nerf ball, and I mean, you're being straightforward with these people. There are parts of our game that, when you describe it, sound really silly and deserve to be laughed at, but once they start seeing what's going on, because usually this happens before an actual game is going to be run. Right, you're talking to them and say, one of the easiest things to do is just watch, man.
I mean, yeah, but you gotta hook them in first.
You do. So I'll tell them, easiest thing I can compare it to is D&D with the classes and things. Each class has different abilities. It's exactly what you would think. If you're playing the warrior, then your stuff is going to be things about getting in and being armored up and being able to shake off certain abilities and keep fighting till the end. If you're a wizard, you're going to be casting spells, which is throwing things that will
Okay,
hinder...
we're getting ahead of the outline though. I want to kind of stick to this. Like, I think
Sure.
I think in our own words, we have all touched on like what we think is important about Amtgard and what it compares to.
Well, I was gonna say there's three avenues that I always hit.
Okay.
Right. So if it's a person who's walked up, right?
Sure.
Then I usually ask them what interested you when you saw the game. Like, basically, are you kind of a sports guy who just happens to like fantasy stuff? So you're like, oh, cool, I can get a workout and hit people. That sounds really fun. So you sell it to them as like the combat sport. You sell it to them through ditching and one-on-ones and militia games and things like that,
Tournaments and the like, yeah.
Mm-hmm. And then two, if they're kind of a PC gamer or console gamer or something like that, you sell it to them similar to World of Warcraft. You kind of give them a little brief work down of, hey, you got classes. Each class does pretty much what you imagine them to do.
Except for Paladin, you can't play that one.
Yeah, fuck that.
Yes, I can.
And then the third one is if they have come either from a D&D or kind of a lightest touch aspect, they typically kind of get they're looking for a little bit more of the role play aspect of things, and that's when I actually give a little more detail into the ANS side of things to some degree, because it's usually they want to look a particular way or something like that too, and so that's a really good way to show them that side of it as well. Yeah. But also, like, sometimes the lightest touch type people, just the Amtgard is not their kind of game because there isn't a role play section for 99% of the game, basically.
Yeah. Put a pin in lightest touch. I actually have that in the outline here and some of the like the subsections here.
Yeah.
But I think we're going to touch on it today.
Oh, okay, cool.
So we will elaborate on that because I'm still a little lost on what it means too.
Yeah. So one last thing before we move on.
Yeah.
Because I want to boil. We talked about quite a bit there. I talked for a while. Boiling it down into 5 points.
14 minutes.
Yeah. Boiling it down into 5 points. One, exactly what Jeff said. Start by asking questions. Hey, my name's so-and-so, why'd you walk up? Because that's going to give you some information. They may just say, I saw a bunch of people, look cool. But you may get something more. So start with questions. 2, very brief outline of what it is. This should be less than a paragraph, where it's, hey, this is a fighting game and this is what we do. You can then talk about some of the other things. Let them ask questions. But you can then go into some of the other things like, yes, there's ANS. Yes, there's role play. One of the main things we do is battle games, that sort of thing. But let it be an organic conversation that you're starting where you are responding to what's going on because they are the customers in this scenario. You are trying to solve whatever problem they're putting forth. The problems in this case being I don't know what you are and I want to, or I want more information about some certain point of the game. So I think you can really cover that in the 5 things that we covered there.
Yeah, absolutely. So that kind of covers the first bit I have where what even is Amtgard. So in our own words, we're kind of, rattling through the things we think are important. The next bit I think is actually like, I spent more time on this than I thought I would. What does Amtgard mean? And that is not one of those, quasi, metaphysical questions of what does Amtgard mean to you? What does the name Amtgard mean? Where did it come from?
The physical definition of Amtgard, right?
Sure.
That depends on who you ask and what history they have been told.
Yeah, so there are at least 4 different theories on how Amtgard got its name. And these are in no particular order, although I will save the most credible one for last. And there's an AmpedWiki article that I will link in the comments below, along with just a whole bunch of other stuff. So Amtgard, the first sort of popular myth is that Amtgard is an acronym using the first initials of the original players of the game. So Aramithras, Medeth, Tawny Darkfalcon, Gylos, Adrenaline, Rift, and Dustin. That is not correct because some of those people are original players, like, the original players, but not all of them.
Hey, for anyone here in Winter's Edge, by the way, Sir Rift was one of the people that helped found our kingdom.
Yep.
Mm-hmm. And you'll still see like names like Aramithras around quite a bit. I know he was for a long time. He held the Burning Lands, like he held the original contract or something.
I think I've said this before, but it turns out he's on our Circle of Knights. The winners at Circle of Knights. He made a post about something that we said. I was like, JW, how did you get on our circle?
Yeah, why are you here? Welcome.
And also hi.
Yeah, no offense or anything. It's just like, man, the guy's everywhere.
He is, yeah, busy guy.
That is not correct. According to most sources, that actually is not true, and people have fact-checked it and found that only a few of those names are original players. So that one kind of falls flat. There is another theory that says that Amtgard is essentially Norse and Icelandic in origin and refers to a quote, land between Midgard and Valhalla, a plane of existence where heroes are more than human, but still less than gods.
I never heard that one before in my life.
That was one of the first ones that I actually heard.
Really?
That sounds like if you made an Amtgard pamphlet, what would go on it? Like,
It does, right?
Like, it sounds like peak marketing bullshit.
You stick that up at the game board in your mall back in the day.
Exactly, yeah. So that also is not true. People who know who know these languages, they verified it. They're just like, no, that's bullshit. There is another theory that the word Amtgard was invented by Peter LeGroux, and we'll talk about him in a minute because he is technically the founder of the game. That Amt is German for office, and Gard is a Norse word for world. So it stands for office world. Also discredited. And kind of funny. Like, that one seems like an inside joke or something. Mm-hmm. And then there's one in the Amt Wiki that is really well written, so I'm not going to vamp on it. I'm just going to read it exactly as is. Back in the beginning times of Amtgard, before there was a name, there was only the sword. Upon the sword was a cover, and the cover was but a mere tube sock. In those days, there was but one company which manufactured a tube sock, the length of which was appropriate for covering a sword. This company was Amt. Therefore, every sword had the letters AMT upon their cover. That's just
that seems
old man bullshittery.
Yeah, but almost probable.
It sounds like what I would name something.
Yeah.
Yeah. This is Gildengard. Is it because you're all wearing Gildan t-shirts? Shut up. Okay. No, so those are all the what if, like, fake names, pretend origins that people come up with. The most realistic one, and the one that we have the most evidence to support, is that it was named after some friends of Peter LeGroux, the guy who created the game, Matthew and I believe Katie or Kathy Amt. So that was Amt was their last name. So it was named for two of his friends. And we'll get into a little bit of the reason why when we talk about Peter LeGroux here in just a minute. Suffice it to say, that guy has a long story, and I'm going to put a link in the comments to read more because there are pages upon pages.
Yeah, not necessarily a great story either.
No, it's tragic and fun. We're going to talk about it some.
Yeah.
But it's just we can't possibly. If we were just to talk about this one dude, it would take us 3 hours.
Yeah.
Just to rattle through it. So there's a history of the origin of the name Amtgard, how it got it. It was named after the creator's friend. So if somebody asks you, what does that stand for? Matthew Amt. And was Matthew Amt one of the original players? No, not really. How does that work out? It just does. So where and when did Amtgard start?
Oh, I know this one.
Okay. Go ahead.
It started in Texas. The very first event was hold on.
Is it the Attila the Hun's birthday bash or something like that?
It was the birthday bash. It was held at the site that later became the original location of our Gathering of the Crowns, which was Cloudcroft, New Mexico.
And what year was that? Because you're all correct so far.
1981.
1983.
Yeah.
Yeah. So Amtgard was started on February 12th, 1983, by Peter LeGroux as an event in El Paso called Attila the Hun's Birthday Bash. Do you know what kind of spawned that?
That is another like what spawned the creation of Amtgard specifically.
Well, let me put it to you a different way. Do you know
Fraud.
how? Huh?
Fraud?
Fraud? No. That comes later. Fraud. And
It's
all
a
that.
good answer.
Yeah. No. So actually, Attila the Hun's Birthday Bash was born out of a very early proto Dagger Here rulebook.
Oh yes, there's still copies of the original Amtgard rulebook in some places.
Straight up copy and pasted, pictures and all.
Yeah. I don't know if there was any difference.
The original, the Attila the Hun's Birthday Bash, I looked, and I will not say this 100% factually, but from what I can tell, the original Attila the Hun's Birthday Bash was a 1-to-1 copy.
Yeah, because Amtgard 1.0 didn't come out for a couple of years after that.
Yeah, it wasn't even called Amtgard that early on.
Yeah,
It was just Attila the Hun's Birthday Bash, and then it sort of floated around as this thing that people did. So yeah, you're dead on the location. That was in El Paso, Texas, and that was in 1983, Attila the Hun's Birthday Bash. And so we're kind of at that point where I can't tease it anymore. We have to talk about who Peter LeGroux was. So there is, oh sweet Lord, I pulled up the Amped Wiki just to make sure I had it right, and
Scrolled for a while.
I scrolled and it just kept going. You know when you scroll and the page just kind of drifts like a boat at sea? It's just like... It did that for a lot longer than it should have. So Peter LeGroux is the original founder of Amtgard. He started this thing. He wanted to do a sort of Dagger Here event. He had originally played Dagger Here. And when he moved to El Paso, he wanted to sort of bring that to where he was. As far as I can tell, the original Amtgard event, the original Attila the Hun's Birthday Bash, was sold as a big event involving like siege engines and tents and all kinds of stuff. And the main attendants of that event were a high school sci-fi club. And when they showed up, yeah, and so far as I can tell, when they showed up, there was nothing but like a few swords. So I mean, first thing didn't go so well, but there were weapons. They had a tournament. This was actually the first tournament was held on the first event, and that was won by, I mentioned this name earlier, Tawny Darkfalcon, which was the first queen of Amtgard. By winning the tournament, she won the title of Queen of Amtgard. And then Peter LeGroux installed himself as Grand Poobah, which was just slightly better than Queen.
Yeah, she was also... Tawny was really, really cool. If I'm not mistaken, she was also the first Serpent Knight once the belts were split, because originally there was only one knighthood in Amtgard.
Right.
And stayed active for a really long time. She just recently, sometime in 2000, I think she passed away.
She did, yeah. But yeah, so Peter LeGroux has this event. He has this tournament. He doesn't win it for whatever reason. So he makes the winner of the tournament the monarch, and then makes himself slightly better monarch with slightly more privileges. Fun how that works out. So from that point on, it was a club, right? It was essentially proto Amtgard. He charged people every week to play. It doesn't say exactly how much. It just says charging each week for people to play. He also charged for the rule book, which at the time I don't think would have been totally legal because it was a Dagger Here rule book, so it wasn't even his material to redistribute. But he did anyway. So he does this. He has this early bit of park and this early bit of power, and then it looks like, from what I can tell, there's a big falling out that happens somewhere in between. There's different reasons as to why people think this happens. Some people think it's just a control thing, because he wanted to be that Grand Poobah, and he wanted to be the lording figure over Amtgard, but it doesn't look like that stuck around. People eventually did push him out of that position, and at a certain point he left the game, tried to come back, and would not be given his titles back, because we had sort of structured the game at the point at which he came back, and those titles didn't exist. Grand Poobah wasn't a thing, and we weren't going to make it a thing just for this one person.
Yeah.
So the short ending of that story, because there's a lot, but the short ending of that story is at some point in the mid-'80s, Amtgard and Peter LeGroux parted ways. Tawny Darkfalcon, the first queen, sort of helped set up the initial structure, and then everyone who came after continued to do that as well. They built onto the game and built structures and built awards. I have an early timeline of Amtgard that I'll rattle through real quick. These are the biggest changes. So game starts in 1983. Sorry. Version 1.0 is released, and remember, this is a Dagger Here rulebook. But we also added on the Assassin and Archer classes. That's that first year. 1984, Monk, Bard, and Barbarian were created. In 1985, the Monster class, and I can only find passing references to this, but a non-magical version of Bard was created. And that never resurfaces. Also in 1985 was when the knighthood paths split.
Well, we got to talk a little bit. Go back and listen to Randall's episode. Sir Randall, if you haven't seen it, he's an amazing episode. Mm-hmm. He talked about Bard in the early days. And when it was being added as a magic class. Remember, he was doing like the very, very early beta testing for it.
Okay. So yeah, that is around this time. A non-magical Bard gets created. And I guess that didn't survive some of the renditions of our rulebook. In 1987, they officially changed the crown position to an elected position. So up until then, you had to be the best fighter to also try to be the best leader. However that worked.
Well, it's the SCA still does it that way. Like that was something that DAG had borrowed from SCA and that we borrowed from DAG.
Yeah, the whole right of arms thing. I'm glad we don't do it now, but that's how it was back then.
Yeah.
So then the last bit on the timeline I have here is 1988, because from this point, so 1988 is the founding of Barad-dûn, which is been very notable for being the first non-Burning Lands Amtgard group. And that's also when the 5.0 rule set came out. So there's a lot of iteration happening in our game from 1983 to 1988. You go from version 1.0 to version 5.0, which at that point I think we were almost fully divorced from the DAG rule set. So that's where I sort of stop my timeline here from those early days, because 1988 founding of Barad-dûn, Sir Michael's episode is basically everything since then.
Yeah, agreed.
So those are kind of the highlights and the big things that happened in between then. But yeah, Peter LeGroux was the founder of the game. He kind of gets ousted, and apparently he will turn up occasionally. It doesn't seem like the guy's doing so hot. I don't know what's going on, but he has sworn off Amtgard. He's a sworn enemy for all intents and purposes. And that's actually one of the things as well with the origin of the name. He named it after his friend as an attempt to, I guess, gain favor. There's a whole write-up on ESAM, which I will also link to. I think I mentioned this, but there's a whole write-up on ESAM from Matthew Amt about
wow.
that side
Yeah,
of
I
things.
read it years ago, I feel like.
Yeah, and from what I
missed
read,
that.
it seemed like a sort of a appeasement attempt, if that makes sense. Like kind of like, hey, let me back in. I'll name the game after you. And like, you know. Or maybe it was, hey, let me stay and I'll name the game after you. And he did it and it didn't work. So that's kind of like how the game gets to spring into existence. And thanks to some really good leadership early on, we saved the game from being some random clone that dies in a year.
Well, so this is a very, very small tangent, but kind of an important one. From Amtgard's very early days, it seems like we were doomed to attract people that want to be tyrants, for lack of a better word. Cult leaders maybe is a better one.
I was about to say that.
And the important ending to this is that from our early days, there were people that stood up and said, no, we are not going to allow this to happen. We're not going to let you monopolize all of this or consolidate this to where you're the grand poobah or whatever.
Right. I think that's the most interesting part, is that like this could have been something that just folded back into Dagger here. Like that part could have died and whatever, it never would have taken off. But I think the first queen has a lot to do with that, because there's a lot of mention of her like saying no to his impulses. So I think that's really cool. And I think, like you said, there's people with common sense standing up and saying, "What the fuck are you doing?"
I want to go ask one of the older players. Michael may know the answer to that. If you're watching this, any of the more experienced players or people that are a little bit better of an Amtgard historian than I am, I believe that the Phoenix being used as a knightly symbol was also Tawny. I believe that was it. I remember this story, and I don't remember the details, if you've ever had one of those. I think it was either she invented the symbol, or it was her personal symbol or something. It came from her, I'm pretty sure.
Supposedly, while I'm buying time for Lucas to look this up.
I'm looking it up. I don't see anything about it.
Supposedly, going on about the knighting type aspect, prior to 7, before you were able to play Paladin or Anti-Paladin, you had to sign in as Knight for 6 weeks.
Yep.
Supposedly, that comes because when Amtgard was created, the first Knight was knighted after 6 weeks. So that waiting period became the waiting period that was traditional in the game.
Oh, that's really cool.
We'll need to do more research on that. And again, this is where our listeners come in and they type something in the
this
comments.
is stuff that I've read randomly around the Amped world kind of thing. So like, I can't say this is 100% it, but that's
same
that's
on
the story
Phoenix
I've
thing.
heard. Yeah,
same on the Phoenix thing. I'm not 100% sure. I just remember having that conversation drunkenly with someone at an event decades ago.
To be clear, this is how most Amtgard history gets passed down. Not only is it an oral tradition, but it's also a drunken oral tradition. So, boy, does it shapeshift. I'm trying to find...
So does a good flow story.
Right.
The best stories are living stories, ladies and gentlemen.
Yeah, there's nothing There's nothing specific on the Phoenix here other than just like a bunch of fluff about why it's a Phoenix.
Leave in the comments if you know the reasoning behind the Phoenix. Leave in the comments.
And if you think it should be a different, cooler bird, like an eagle or a turkey, then
Damn it, we are really in the drift, and I hate
sucks,
it.
doesn't it? Wow, that's very concerned. It looks like the hand from the Addams Family is trying to steal my vape. Do it again. All right. This is my lovely fiance stealing my vape. So that's the origin of the name. And Amtgard did start as a LARP. So this comes to the next point, which is, what the fuck is a LARP?
So for those of you who don't know, it's live action role playing game or role playing. I guess game's not necessarily in it, but there are many versions of that basically. So and it's also regional to a degree. So we have the Americanized LARPs, which are basically Amtgard, Dagahir, and Bellegarth, which are more combat heavy.
Does SCA count as a LARP?
Yes, I think it does anyway.
Wait, a reenactment is just a LARP. Oh my god.
Yeah.
Okay. Anyway.
And to like you said, a lesser degree in that aspect, SCA as well. Then there's what we generally call lightest touch LARPs, which is going to be like Nero.
What's the Hero one?
That
I think it's just called Hero.
Yeah, well,
okay.
I think that's regionally a Tennessee thing or something close to that.
Explain to me real quick, what is lightest touch and how do we differ from that?
So lightest touch is basically anything that touches you is it. Where we have light, where we don't have light per se, like Dagahir and Bellegarth does.
But we have draw cuts and we have
conditional things that make a shot not a shot. Right?
Yeah. To spell this out, we are using the types of shots that are considered legal in different games to define those games. Games like Dag and Bell, you can be hit and it not be hard enough to count. It wasn't in roleplay sense, it wouldn't have been good enough to actually injure you.
Right.
And in SCA, I don't even know what the rule is there, but apparently you just go until the other person goes, ow. And that's how that works.
In Amtgard, we have shots that do not count, but we have tried to specify above just it being light. So things like a draw cut, if I miss a stab or something like that and it just saws past him, don't count. Lightest touch, by comparison, usually have rules on how hard you can hit.
Yes.
So you cannot go above...
And how many times per second you can actually swing.
Right.
And things like this. There's a lot of interesting things. There's some differing factors, like if you touch the sword with your block, anything that touches you doesn't count for some of them. Some of them, it's still just if it touches you, that's all it is. Okay. So this one's like a broad term that kind of just is the role play focused rather than combat focused groups. And then there's the European style, or a European style anyway, which is kind of like what I think Bickley in Canada, I think it's Canada anyway, someone can correct me, I'm sure, is where you are in control of you. So if me and Flo are fighting, at some point one of us is going to decide we are going to lose. Not that I'm going to win. I am going to lose in this battle some way or another. I'm going to basically allow a shot to continue through and hit me and decide you have injured my arm, you have killed me, you have done something, and it is a role-playing aspect where it's much closer to a kind of vampire LARP in a way, I guess. That's
like
another
the old Masquerade.
My
thing.
immediate thought was it's like when I played Army Men as a kid and there were no rules. You're like, pew,
that's
pew,
actually
pew.
the more
my guy died.
analogous thing than a vampire LARP. Vampire LARPs are actually another kind of thing, which is closer to a parlor LARP, which is like a thing where combat doesn't happen physically, where it's like rock, paper, scissors decides what combat happens, or some other non-aggressive format, I guess.
Yeah.
Sometimes I actually participated in a Masquerade LARP when I was younger for a couple of their big events, and you would roll dice.
Mm-hmm.
I was just an NPC, so I was meant to deliver a very specific message, and I could be persuaded without having to roll dice just through good role play.
Yes.
Or someone could role play and then reach a point where they say, I am going to roll, and they would, and if they got a success, which in that game on a D10 was an 8, 9, or 10, then they succeeded and they got the information. It was an interesting system.
So to broadly define LARP, live action roleplay, just like a lot of games are role playing games. So you start the game and you are Cloud, and that is the character you play throughout the entire thing. Or if you like better RPGs, you are Lavitz from Legend of Dragoon because that's a good game.
Yeah, thank you.
It.
Final Fantasy VII is trash. I'm sorry.
It's not trash. It's just not as good as Legend of Dragoon.
Yeah,
It's got
agreed.
whatever.
Was Legend of Dragoon the one that when you opened up the CD cover, the back of the CD cover said this should last you until Final Fantasy VII comes out?
I don't remember. I know
don't
it had like
think so.
5
No,
discs
that was
or
Wild
something.
Arms. Wild
Yes.
Arms, for any of our old PlayStation players, actually had a thing in the back that said, this role-playing game should last you until Final Fantasy VII comes out.
Right, but to broadly define a LARP, though, you are playing a character, and that character is you. You can spec it out with whatever kit you think is appropriate. You can have a class maybe that is that defines your character in some way. You take on a persona name. That's why in Amtgard I am Cabbage and not Lucas. That's why he is Flo and not Gary. That's why he's Teflon and not Jeff. So you take on the role of that person. And some of the people we've interviewed take on multiple characters. Regan had a whole week.
Yeah.
Full of just different...
Swiggity Swooty is the only one that I remember, and I feel like it's the only one I need to.
So you are playing a role of some kind. To take it back to wrestling, those people are not. I'm sorry, Roman Reigns is not actually Roman Reigns. I mean, it's kayfabe, right?
Are you saying that our Big Red Mayor is not actually Kane?
Listen, I hate our Big Red Mayor. I fucking hate him. I can't.
By the way, Kane is the actual mayor of Knoxville right
Yep.
now, to
Yeah.
anyone from not from this area that didn't know.
Yeah, he's the Big Red Machine. He's a Big Red Mayor.
Glenn Jacobs.
He's a tortured soul. You don't know right from wrong. It's a poor lost soul.
That part's true.
Yeah. No, actually, damn it, I'm going to make a tangent. When he won the election of mayor, he came out to his wrestling song,
He did, yeah.
which is, I think, Slow Chemical by Finger 11.
Yeah.
Like, he came out to make a speech to that song.
He choked slammed someone during a quote unquote debate or something like that too.
It was,
I think
it was
I
a
guess-
mock debate where he put somebody through a table. We're
Yeah.
living in idiocracy times, and it sucks. It's so bad. Anyway,
LARP.
so yeah, LARP. You are playing a character. That is the broadest definition. I think from all of the things that Teflon and Flo have said, Amtgard kind of picks and chooses a lot of those things. So we're not a lightest touch LARP.
No, we don't have as big of immersion. We're not. A lot of lightest touch LARPs also have a well-defined world, and we have a non-defined world at all.
Yeah, I
Period.
mean,
End of story.
The Amtgard world is kind of made up of our geographic locations. Like, we very much follow the map of the United States. Our kingdom is Tennessee and Alabama and Georgia and a couple of other things. But talk about immersion really quick, because that's something I had on my list. Because some LARPs have a bigger immersion factor.
Yeah,
I think
so
it's DAG. that is?
Jeff's going to have a big one on here. I want to give a very brief synopsis before he goes,
Okay,
because
sure.
his is going to be a lot better than mine. When we say immersion, the way that we are using the word for a LARP is that the whole world is set. So picture, if you're more of a D&D person, picture that you are actually inside Forgotten Realms. You're using actual names from that setting. Or if you're not that big, you are actually on D&D lore, you're actually inside the Marvel universe. So all of those things that exist in the Marvel universe, Pym Tower is actually a place that you could roleplay going in some way.
Right.
That is what we mean by immersion. And it can be as deep or as shallow as your particular group chooses to do it. I think what Jeff's going to touch on is an example of some of the lightest touch, which is as deep as you can go. They would actually be in Elwyn Forest in the Lord of the Rings.
They're
setting.
actually one step from the deepest, because I feel like the European LARPs go the farthest as far as immersion
That's
goes.
because they can do the
Damn
accents
Europeans.
Well, yeah, there's that too. So immersion, Lucas, probably pulling a flat definition of immersion might be really good here. But I'm going to go ahead and continue as well. So again, their worlds are very defined. So they usually have a name for the area or world, even at its largest, and then you are usually playing in a specific part. I played in a lightest touch called Exodune, and they played in what was called the Fifth Ward, if I remember correctly, and that was very specific part of an island that the entire world or the entire game took place in.
Right. So immersion is just a deep mental involvement. So this can be, I have seen some pretty immersive moments in Amtgard where, people are playing a character that has a full accent, that has a full garb with a coterie of people with them, that kind of thing. For the most part in Amtgard, I feel like the biggest points of immersion are during certain types of games and during like feasts and nightings.
Yeah, agreed.
And that's pretty much the end of it. So if you're at an Amtgard event, you don't have to be in full character all the time. You can. It certainly adds to the game, and I think it's really cool, but it's not a requirement.
These lightest touch games typically, again, defined, and they define the races and stuff too, and sometimes they're different from what we think of them in a D&D term. And with those, they carry requirements to play that class, and that requirement is to be met on the first day that you go and play as well. So if you need to have, let's say, a gnoll, right? You would need to have some form of ears that were furry, and if you were a spotted, striped, or something other kind of gnoll, that could be a thing. So you would have to show that you were which one of the subclasses of gnoll in it.
Gnoll spelled Gnoll, right?
Correct.
Okay.
Remind me, are gnolls the dog people?
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
They're kind of hyenas.
Yeah,
Hogger
hyena.
was a gnoll if
Yeah.
you're
Oh,
an old
yeah,
World
yeah.
of Warcraft player. 40-man level 1 raid on Hogger. Let's go.
So yeah, defining those, and then on top of that, sometimes they define different parts of the world that you come from. So not only are you having to find yourself inside the racial modifiers, I guess, for the racial requirements for the character you're playing, you also have to form to some of the regional requirements. So like if you are from Atlantis. Or something like that.
The mystical land
of
of
Atlanta.
It was so like, the racial requirement. You know, like if you're from Atlanta.
That was so bad. What a slip. But if you're from Atlantis, then you have to portray, like in your garb, the trends in Atlantis at the time.
It's got to be wet all the time.
Yeah, right. It's got to be wet. God, I can't speak today. That's just the problem.
No, you're good.
Or like they're always wearing light blues and flowing clothing and things like that. So you have to maintain that requirement inside your gear as well. I don't know if they go so as far as to say like these are the only weapons you're allowed to use from these parts of things, but that could easily be something. So they define everything. So the moment that you get into the game and you look at someone, if you've read through the rulebook at all, you know what they are, where they're from, and what likely their reactions to certain things will be.
Okay, yeah. So to broadly define, immersion are the bounds, the minimum and maximum bounds of commitment that is expected from anyone within the game.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, someone that I spoke with that was new that I was talking to used this to describe it, and I thought it was really good. Avatar had just now come out at the time, and they said, "Oh, it's kind of like you always know a waterbender when you see it in the show, or you always know a firebender when you see it in the show because they're all generally dressed the same." I was like, yeah, it's exactly like that.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So how does Amtgard play into that then? Because we are, as far as I can tell, we're not a lightest touch LARP, and our immersion factor ranges all over the board. You do not have to commit to any character, but you can.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so
in a way, it's a zero, right?
Yeah, it's
because you can do whatever you want. I can be a gnome from 2430 or something like that that's been transported via time travel back here, and I'm trying to kind of disguise myself in the medieval fantasy realm of things.
Yeah, you can bend it to fit into.
Yeah,
like to give everyone a very base definition of what has been my typical experience in Amtgard. When you're out at the local, there are people at different parks that handle this in different ways, and different parks that handle it in different ways. In general, when you're just sitting around drinking water and stuff like that, nobody's talking in character and doing any of those things. You're joking about whatever new show came on Netflix.
That was one other point that I forgot to make. In those lightest touch LARPs and things like that, you're expected to be your character pretty much the entire time, or they have a time frame that you are in character, and then once like 9 p.m. hits, then you can be out or something like that.
Yeah. And like I've seen things where you'd be like, oh yeah, I was watching the show on Netflix, and somebody will come up to you and be like, what Netflix? What is this? You know,
Yes.
they'll try to rope you back into the scenario.
Yeah, absolutely. So with Amtgard, I agree with Jeff. We're a zero commitment 99% of the time. People are not in character when we're out ditching or doing militia battles, which is in general our version of warming up or getting better at a particular fighting style. There's no abilities coming into play. It's just you and whatever weapon combination you have. When you sit down to do a battle game, again, depending on what park you're at, you may see some people getting more into character. I have been to parks that were very, very serious about being in character and looking the part whenever they were in a battle game. And I've been to plenty of parks where people were wearing, Ray-Bans with tie-dye tank tops on and flip-flops, and they're like, yeah, man, I'm a barbarian. So I would say that the majority of the people that I see are not role-playing in battle games outside, like at their regular park. Kingdom level events are a little different. You see more role-play there. And again, it's going to vary based on the park that you've been to as well. I'm telling you my personal experiences in it. Kingdom level, you see more roleplay. The things that you're doing there, the big grand quests, are meant to be a little bit more showy and a little bit more involved in the roleplay.
We also don't have a minimum garb level. Even Dagger here and Bellegarth do, which is an interesting point to some degree.
Now, we kind of do, right? If you want to actually play a class in our game past a certain threshold, you need to have garb.
Yeah, but we don't require it, whereas the others actually require it.
Yeah, so even show up on field.
Yeah, so here's an example. Talking to Belle, who plays Bellegarth, but that's not where he got the name from. You're not allowed to, you can't carry around a can of beer or a can of Coke. People will get little clay containers to slide it down into so that it looks like they're drinking from a clay cup or something like that. You can't go out with Nikes on your shoes. If you can go buy Nike cleats if you want to, but then you have to put what are they called? The little things.
That technically you can't use cleats in Bell, but
cleats might have been a bad example.
Spats that cover your
spats are some sort of covering that covers up modern logos and things like that.
Whereas in Amtgard we would just sell it as ye olden swoosh.
Yeah,
and that's it, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So this is one of those things, though. I want to point out because we've been talking about two different things here, the big differences. That lightest touch that Jeff was talking about is that these things are required. None of these things are required in Amtgard, but there are some parks that do that. They want that flavor. And if you're at a park that doesn't have a whole lot of roleplay, talk to people about wanting to do it. There's probably other people at your park that are interested in doing something.
You build it and they will come.
Yeah,
basically.
Absolutely.
So a couple more things here. Before I touch on what is our last bullet point for this episode, I want to give a quick TLDR of all the things we've kind of gone through.
Sure.
So this first episode has been, what even is Amtgard? And I've got a nice TLDR written here. Amtgard was born as a Dagger Here offshoot in El Paso in 1983 by Peter LeGroux. It is named for a friend of his named Matthew Ampt. It is a live-action role-playing game, but it has no minimum level of commitment in terms of either roleplay or in terms of combat. Does that sound like a good wrap-up?
It does, yeah.
Okay, so the last thing I want to talk about is something called The Dream. And it gets referenced a lot. You'll see a lot of AIBOD officials reference it. They'll say in service to The Dream. And it comes up a lot when kind of higher echelon stuff happens with Amtgard. The Dream was somewhat named after and inspired by a song called The Impossible Dream from a musical called Man of La Mancha. The dream, or the quote, the dream that is Amtgard, refers to the way that Amtgard should ideally be experienced. It's an atmosphere of brotherhood and acceptance. One of the things that makes Amtgard unique is that people from different and mundane walks of life, people who would not normally associate with one another otherwise, will, in Amtgard, take the field side by side as comrades in arms. There are also more definitions of the dream. The Amtwiki says, there are as many definitions of the dream as there are Amtgarders. But in all of those, it is how they believe Amtgard should optimally be experienced. So you'll see that referenced a lot if you pay attention to some of the social media stuff. And that was started fairly early on with our game. What are you doing?
Sorry, I just now noticed Jeff's tan line, and it's super bothered.
Delivery man tan line?
Yeah, right.
Mine's not that, but oh God.
I have hella farmer's tan.
Yeah, dude, me too.
Look at me go. Yeah, it's all the disc golf. So that is sort of the intro to what is Amtgard. We've kind of covered some of the early questions that a lot of people have, like what the hell does it stand for and why does it exist? We'll get into more stuff next week. why don't we talk about what we're doing tomorrow and what we have coming up this weekend?
Oh, okay.
Because we are going to our grand nights, I guess, Stinkfoot's.
He probably won't watch this episode, so it won't break
knighting?
the...
He knows he's getting knighted by now.
Yeah, but he didn't know we were coming. He won't watch. He's not going to watch this though.
Yeah, this is going to go up at noon tomorrow. He's
Yeah,
got a
there's
very
no
small
way.
window.
But yeah, so my knight, who you've heard me talk about before, Stinkfoot, is getting his third belt, and so we're heading down.
Which ones does he have?
He has
for those
Serpent,
listening.
Crown, and now Flame.
Yeah, he does have the traffic light of belts.
Oh wow, he does.
and so he's getting his flame. He actually qualified for it a long time ago, but Florida has a lot of people that are getting knighted that it was their first belt, and but yeah, so it's going to be an exciting thing. I think they're having like a kingdom level event there at his local park, and really looking forward to that. So we're all going to pile in the van and head down for that. Let's see, we're playing some disc golf while we're down there too. Man, we got to get some disc golf merch.
So that's a good teaser. I think we can leave it here. I don't want to make these episodes too long because there's a lot to cover, and I want people to be able to listen to it and understand without having to deal with us for 2 whole hours every episode.
Yeah, sure.
But that does kind of touch on what we're going to talk about next week, which is how does it work, and that's the social structure and hierarchy, and then the kind of combat side of that as well. So in that social structure, we talk about knighthoods and things like that.
Sure. Lucas, you want to roll us out?
Absolutely. Hey everyone, thanks for listening. If you liked what you heard, be sure to subscribe to our podcast on YouTube or Spotify to get notified about new episodes.
Man,
and make sure to follow us on
Tan is
Facebook
real.
for announcements and more.